Hello, thanks for stopping by to check out the second installment of The Darkest Files. This week, we'll take a look at an evil perpetrator from just after the turn of the 20th century. A man who, in retrospect, could have been any of our great-grandfathers. A man confused. He was known by those who lived this tale as the New Orleans Axeman. It was May 23, 1918. Joseph and Catherine Maggio slept peacefully alongside each other in the bedroom of their home on the corner of Upper Line and Magnolia. The humid night air hung heavy over the narrow streets, and soon whispers of fear would be swept through the city like a sinister melody. In the dim light of gas lamps, shadowy figures dart furtively through the alleyways. The Maggios operated a barroom and grocery at the same location where they slept and were very proud Italian immigrants. Sometime during the night, as a panel from their door was being quietly pried loose with a chisel, Joseph's brother Andrew slept in the apartment next door. He had been drinking quite heavily earlier in celebration prior of his departure to join the Navy. Later, he would explain that he had seen a man lurking outside the residence, but sadly would not hear the commotion that took place that awful New Orleans night. Andrew would eventually wake up to what he later called strange groaning noises coming through the walls. He and his other brother Jake soon investigated and found the horror that had been estimated to have taken place only 2 hours prior. Their brother and sister-in-law had both been attacked. Joseph was still alive, but would soon succumb to his injuries. Both had their throats slit, with Catherine's head being nearly decapitated. As the killer had left the residence, he had bashed each of their skulls with an axe, possibly to conceal the real cause of death. It was a gruesome scene. In a corner, law enforcement found the bloody clothing the murderer had worn during his rage of brutality. He had presumably changed into a clean set before fleeing the scene. Later, the bloody razor used in the attack had been found on the lawn of a neighboring property. It turned out to belong to Andrew and had been removed from his barber shop on Camp Street in order to have a nick in the blade honed out. Visible valuables were not taken, and robbery was soon ruled out as motivation. Andrew became a prime suspect, but police were unable to physically connect him to the crime. On the pavement nearby, the killer had written a message reading, "Mrs. Maggio will sit up tonight, just like Mrs. Tony." It had later been theorized that the message was referencing Anthony and Joanna Sciambra. They were Italian greengrocers who were attacked with an axe in 1911. Mrs. Sciambra had been killed and was known by customers as Mrs. Tony. In the early hours of June 17, 1918, Louis Basuma and his mistress Harriet Lowe were attacked in the quarters at the back of Mr. Basuma's grocery, which was located at the corner of Dorgenois and La Harpe streets. They were both attacked with an axe that belonged to Basuma and was later found covered in blood in the bathroom of the apartment. Louis stated to police that he had been sleeping when he was bashed just above the right temple, causing a skull fracture. Harriet was hacked over the left ear and was found unconscious when investigators arrived. They were originally found in a puddle of their own blood by John Zanker, a driver of a bakery wagon who was making a routine delivery, and retrieved authorities to the residence. A 41-year-old African-American named Louis Ubicon was quickly arrested. He had been employed in Mr. Basuma's store just a week before the attacks and had given conflicting accounts of his whereabouts that morning. He was then released just as quickly due to lack of evidence. Robbery was originally thought to be the motive, though no money or anything of value had been taken. Less than 2 months later, on August 5th, Harriet Lowe would die after a failed surgery to repair her partially paralyzed face. As she lay dying, she had made many delirious statements, one being Louis Basuma himself, was the attacker. He was later arrested and then released after 9 months and a trial that took the jury only 10 minutes of deliberation to acquit him. The immigrant community of New Orleans would tremble in terror as the news spread of yet another attack by this elusive predator. The victims, all so far Italian immigrants, were brutally struck down in their own homes. The murder weapon, a tool borrowed from within, and twice now, an axe. 28-year-old Anna Schneider was 8 months pregnant and living on Elmira Street when she awoke to a dark figure standing over her in the evening hours of August 5, 1918. Her face would be bashed repeatedly by the intruder, causing deep scalp lacerations that completely covered her face with blood. Just after midnight, her husband Ed had found her after returning home late from work. Mrs. Schneider had no memory of the attack and gave birth to a healthy baby girl 2 days later. Nothing of value but a couple dollars on a nightstand had been taken and no sign of forced entry could be found. Lead investigators began to publicly speculate the relation to the previous attacks. Reporters would clamor for the latest details, their typewriters clacking furiously as they would churn out sensational headlines. The city was gripped by a frenzy of speculation, with rumors swirling of mafia involvement despite a lack of evidence. The media circus would only add to the panic spreading like wildfire. Two sisters, Pauline and Mary Bruno, lived in an adjoining room to their elderly uncle Joseph Romano. On August 10, 1918, they awoke to loud bangs and clamoring coming from Joseph's room. As they entered, they could see that he had taken a serious blow to the head that had caused several open wounds which were bleeding heavily. A dark-skinned, heavy-set man was seen fleeing the room as they arrived. He wore a dark suit and slouched hat, but they could not make out any other features. The room had been ransacked, but there had been nothing stolen from Mr. Romano. A bloody axe was found in the backyard by authorities, and access to the home had been achieved by chiseling a panel loose from the door. Mr. Romano was able to walk to the ambulance when it arrived, but he died 2 days later, in the hospital, due to the severe head trauma he had received. A then-retired Italian detective named John D'Antonio took a bold stance, stating that he believed the man who committed the Axeman murders was the same man who had killed several individuals in 1911. He believed the person to have had dual personalities, to kill without motive, and to very well be a normal law-abiding citizen. He later described the killer as a real-life Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. The streets buzz with tension as the case of the Axeman remains unsolved. Despite tireless efforts by law enforcement, the killer's identity remains shrouded in mystery, leaving the families of the victims to grapple with the agonizing uncertainty of never finding closure. Men stand guard outside their homes, armed with whatever makeshift weapons they can find, their hearts pounding with the knowledge that they may be the next target. Yet even in the face of danger, the city refuses to yield to fear, its spirit as resilient as the music that fills its streets. On the night of March 10, 1919, screams were heard coming from the residents on the corner of Jefferson Avenue and 2nd Street in Gretna, Louisiana, a New Orleans suburb across the Mississippi River. Charles Cortimiglia, his wife Rosie, and their 2-year-old daughter Mary were savagely attacked while asleep in their bed. A neighbor grocer, Iolando Giordano, had heard the screams and rushed across the street to investigate. He first encountered Rosie standing in the doorway with a very noticeable head wound. She held in her arms her daughter, who was obviously deceased. The laceration across the back of the infant's neck was very prominent and left no doubt in Mr. Giordano's mind of her state. Mr. Cortimiglia lay on the floor next to the bed he had been clubbed in. He bled profusely from head wounds that had been inflicted on him. The couple were rushed to Charity Hospital, and it was found that both had skull fractures. There was nothing found to have been stolen, and a panel on the back door of their home was found to have been chiseled away. On the back porch, leaning over in the shadows, the weapon used to afflict the senseless carnage was found: a bloody axe. Once Rosie had regained full consciousness, she claimed 69-year-old Orlando and his 18-year-old son, Frank Giordano, had committed the despicable acts. Though he was in too poor of health to have committed the crime, and 6 foot, 200-pound Frank was too large to fit through the panel hole, both men were arrested and charged with murder. There would be a quick trial, and both were found guilty. Frank was sentenced to hang and his father to life in prison. Charles Cortimiglia vehemently denied his wife's claims and would divorce her following the trial. Almost a year later, Rosie came clean and admitted she had lied, and her accusations were brought on by spite and jealousy. Nothing but her statement had as evidence, and the 2 men were released shortly after. Detectives would pour their souls into cracking the case, their frustration mounting as the killer continued to evade capture. Theories abound, from the possibility of a sexual predator to the outlandish notion that the murders are a twisted promotion of jazz music sparked by a mysterious letter purportedly written by the Axeman. The letter read, "Hell, March 13th, 1919. Esteemed mortal. They have never caught me, and they never will. They have never seen me, for I am invisible, even as the ether that surrounds your earth. I am not a human being, but a spirit and a demon from the hottest hell. I am what you Orleanians and your foolish police call the Axeman. When I see fit, I shall come and claim other victims. I alone know whom they shall be. I shall leave no clue except my bloody axe, besmeared with blood and brains of he whom I have sent below to keep me company. If you wish, you may tell the police to be careful not to rile me. Of course, I am a reasonable spirit. I take no offense at the way they have conducted their investigations in the past. In fact, they have been so utterly stupid as to not only amuse me, but His Satanic Majesty, Francis Joseph, etc. But tell them to beware. Let them not try to discover what I am, for it were better that they were never born than to incur the wrath of the Axeman. I don't think there is any need of such a warning, for I feel sure the police will always dodge me, as they have in the past. They are wise and know how to keep away from all harm. Undoubtedly, you Orleanians think of me as a most horrible murderer, which I am. But I could be much worse if I wanted to. If I wished, I could pay a visit to your city every night. At will, I could slay thousands of your best citizens, for I am in close relationship with the Angel of Death. Now, to be exact, at 12:15 earthly time, on next Tuesday night, I am going to pass over New Orleans. In my infinite mercy, I am going to make a little proposition to you people. Here it is. I am very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions that every person shall be spared in whose home a jazz band is in full swing at the time I have just mentioned. If everyone has a jazz band going, well then, so much the better for you people. One thing is certain, and that is that some of your people who do not jazz it out on that specific Tuesday night, if there be any, will get the axe. Well, as I am cold and crave the warmth of my native Tartarus, and it is about time I leave your earthly home, I will cease my discourse. Hoping that thou wilt publish this, that it may go well with thee, I have been, am, and will be the worst spirit that ever existed, either in fact or realm of fantasy. The Axeman. On March 13th, 1919, the letter was published in newspapers. That night, all of New Orleans dance halls were filled to capacity, and professional and amateur bands played jazz at parties at hundreds of houses. No one died that night. 5 months later, Steve Boker, a grocer, was attacked by an axe-wielding intruder in his bedroom on August 10, 1919. In the darkness of the night, he awoke, saw the assailant, and was quickly rendered unconscious with a crack to his head. He was able to run to his neighbor, Frank Janusa's home, before collapsing. There was nothing missing in his home, but once again, a panel had been chiseled from the back door. Mr. Boker recovered, but could not remember any details of the trauma. Neighbors came to check on Sarah Laumann the night of September 3rd, 1919. When there was no answer at the door, they broke into the single woman's home. The 19-year-old had been knocked unconscious and was missing several teeth. It was found that the intruder had come through a window. A bloody axe was found on the front lawn of the building. Miss Laumann recovered, but had no recollection of the attack. Mike Pepitone was attacked the night of October 27, 1919. His wife awoke to sounds of distress and went to his room, where she saw a large axe-wielding man flee the scene. Mr. Pepitone's head had been struck and he was covered in blood, as was the majority of his room. Mrs. Pepitone, the mother of 6 children, did not get a good look at the assailant and could give no description. The axeman was never caught or identified, and Mike Pepitone's murder was the last attributed to him. His crime spree stopped as mysteriously as it had started. The murderer's identity remains unknown to this day, although various possible identifications of varying plausibility have been proposed.